Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner, here on The Story Within? We retell those moments honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. You don't belong up here. Lucas Whitmore's palm landed lightly on my shoulder, polite enough to pass, as courtesy firm enough to deny passage. His voice was tuned for public spaces, a blade wrapped in velvet. The first 3 rows are for family Ms. Ward. I looked straight into the son's eyes, and for a startled instant saw the father. Same gray-green irises Charles had, but none of his warmth. Lucas, I said, keeping my tone even, I'm not here to make a scene. I'm here to say goodbye. You had 8 years, he replied, the corner of his mouth barely moving. This morning is for the people who were there for all of it. Behind him, his sister Celeste and his brother Rowan hovered near the aisle, like twin sentries, uncomfortable but immobile. The funeral home smelled faintly of furniture polish and lilies. Somewhere a hidden speaker leaked slow organ chords. The carpets swallowed footsteps. The Whitmore name gleamed in brushed brass along the wall, Whitmore Memorial Chapel. One of the smaller ironies of the morning. Where should I sit? I asked. I adjusted the sleeve of the black jacket Charles had once teased me for buying. Too sober, he'd said, then let my hands fall. Lucas's gaze slid past me toward the rear. There's probably space at the back. If not, standing won't hurt you. I nodded, stepped aside, and walked the long aisle past the portraits of ancestors. Stern men with watch chains, women in lace collars, children posing beside hounds. Celeste wouldn't meet my eye. Rowan did briefly and looked away as if singed. By the last row I found every seat taken. An elderly woman spotted me and shifted. Elena here, she whispered, patting the space she'd opened. It was Mrs. Hanley, Charles's former secretary, wrists stacked with thin gold bangles. Her lipstick hadn't smudged despite her tears. This is wrong, she murmured as I sat. Mr. Whitmore would be furious. Thank you, I said, keeping my voice low. Today isn't about who sits where. From the back I saw the compromised version of Charles that his children presented to the world, a titan of real estate precision success. The officiant offered neutral comfort. Mourners streamed up the aisle, pausing to touch a high lacquered casket flanked by hydrangeas. Vivian, his ex-wife, occupied the front row center, veiled in a wisp of black netting, dabbing at dry eyes with a linen handkerchief. Though divorced from him for 15 years, she wore the posture of a widow rehearsed. If I tilted my head, I could just see the open hymnal Charles's eldest grandson pretended to read, and the outline of the program embossed with the Whitmore crest. Absent were Charles's crossword habits, the way he hummed Sinatra when he ordered takeout, the fact that he remembered the valet's name and tipped with both cash and kindness. Success made the program. The rest of him, softer parts, did not. When the music ended and the last condolence was offered, I stayed seated while the rows emptied. I carried a sprig of rosemary in my purse, his favorite scent wrapped in a square of parchment paper, and wanted to lay it under his hand. The aisle cleared. I rose. Rowan started toward me, then stopped. Lucas reached me first. The car is leaving for the cemetery, he said, voice as cool as stone. Burial is family only. His family. I understand, I replied. More than he guessed. Charles and I had discussed precisely this moment during those grazed weeks between diagnosis and goodbye, when the days began shrinking like a sweater pulled wrong in the wash. He had known his children would try to write me out of the ending. He had also known I would not push my way in. I slipped the rosemary back into my purse and walked out alone into the January light. The sky was a flat, expensive gray, the kind designers choose when they want to neutralize a room. A breeze tugged the edges of the prayer cards clutched in my hand. In the car, I let the engine idle and breathed in the scent of wool and cold. A week later, Mr. Adler, Charles's attorney of 3 decades, texted at 7:12 p.m. Reading of the will tomorrow, 2:00 p.m. My office. Charles insisted you be present. He never called me Mrs. or Ms., in writing always Elena, as if he knew that titles were landmines today. I typed a simple acknowledgement, then pulled out the notebook I kept during those late hospital nights, when monitors blinked and Charles dictated small things to be remembered, the tax record for the Santa Fe property, the safe deposit key in his briefcase, the music list for a memorial he dreaded but planned anyway. On a page near the back, creased from rereading, I had copied in his words what must never be forgotten. You are not a footnote. Do not let anyone make you one. At 1:30 the next afternoon, the elevators opened onto Adler and Finch's hallway. Lacquered walnut, thick carpet, tasteful art. Frosted glass etched with partner names gleamed under gallery lights. Waiting at the glass doors precisely as I expected were the 3 Whitmores, united this time, not by grief but by purpose. Well, Lucas said, stepping forward, if it isn't the opportunist right on cue. Hello, Lucas, I said. Mr. Adler is expecting me. Rowan took one side of his brother Celeste, the other as if they had rehearsed the formation. Let's save you some embarrassment, Lucas went on. You're not in the will. We've seen drafts. Our father wasn't a fool. Is that so? I replied, keeping my face a neutral practical mask, the one I used in boardrooms long before any of them learned the term EBT Day. Celeste spoke her crisp consonants slightly less sharp than her brother's. The estate is to be divided among us, as it should be. I reached into my tote and removed a sealed envelope with H. Adler pinned in Charles's unmistakable hand. He always wrote the capital A like a little stepladder. Would you make sure Mr. Adler receives this, I said. He knows it's coming. Lucas took it reluctantly the way people accept a jury summons. What is it, he asked. An appeal. Instructions, I said. The glass doors opened then, and Mr. Adler himself appeared trim as ever in a navy suit that could have come from either the previous decade or the next. Ms. Ward, he said with the professional warmth of an old ally. Right on time? Thank you, Lucas. I'll take that. She doesn't need to be here, Lucas said, but Adler had already turned. On the contrary, the attorney replied mildly, your father was explicit. We moved to the conference room, a long rectangle of polished wood sunlight flattening the skyline, beyond the windows into paper cutouts. I took a seat at the far end, not at the head. There were water glasses, legal pads, a bowl of almonds no one touched. Adler slit the envelope with a silver letter opener engraved HFA and scanned the contents quickly. Something in his expression shifted surprise, smoothing into comprehension. Very well, he said, sliding the paper into a leather portfolio. Let's begin. He read the preamble with the solemn cadence of a man who had read too many preambles to count. Lucas tapped a knuckle against the table once, twice, impatience measured in small percussion. I'll skip to the dispositive provisions, Adler said, adjusting his rimless glasses. Regarding the distribution of my estate, he paused, not dramatically, but precisely the way a surgeon might pause before an incision. To my wife, Elena Ward, he read, I leave 70% of my estate, including but not limited to my primary residence on Commonwealth Avenue, my portfolio of publicly traded securities, and controlling interest in Whitmore and Kent Holdings. The words hung a moment in the polite, conditioned air. Celeste's lips parted as if to ask a question that forgot itself. Rowan's pen went still. That's absurd, Lucas said, rising half out of his chair. We saw a preliminary will. Adler's tone didn't change. This is the final will and testament executed with all formalities. It supersedes prior drafts. Forgery, Lucas said, or undue influence. Adler turned a page. To my children, Lucas Whitmore. Rowan Whitmore and Celeste Whitmore. I bequeath 10% each to be held in trust and administered by my wife Elena as trustee until such time as each demonstrates fiscal responsibility and personal growth consistent with the conditions set forth in Appendix B. Administered, Celeste asked, what does that mean exactly? It means, Adler replied, folding his hands, that while each of you inherits a share, significant financial decisions regarding that share require the trustee's approval until conditions are met. Rowan leaned forward, eyes narrowing, not in outrage but analysis. On what basis did he decide she should control our access? Adler reached into the portfolio and removed a second envelope sealed with the Whitmore signet in wax Charles had insisted on using like a Victorian dramatist. Your father anticipated that question, he said. He left a letter to be read aloud at this meeting. He broke the seal and unfolded several pages, the cream paper dense with Charles's handwriting, strong declarative strokes even in illness. I had not seen this letter. Charles had told me it existed, then refused to show me. My children, Adler read, and the room rearranged itself around the voice of a dead man. If you are hearing this, it means you have learned that your inheritance includes conditions. You may be angry. You may believe Elena manipulated me. She did not. The decision is mine. I have watched each of you confuse access with entitlement, privilege with purpose. Adler's voice remained steady, but I could hear the undertow of Charles plain as if he stood at the window with his hands in his pockets. Lucas, the letter continued. Your ventures have often been impressive in presentation and hollow in durability. I have covered more losses than you realize. The lesson you must learn is not how to raise capital, but how to steward it. Rowan Adler read, and the middle son flinched by a degree. You are brilliant with numbers and reckless with risk. Twice I have intervened to prevent consequences you called bad luck, but which were patterns. You must learn limits before limits find you. Celeste and the name softened the air. Your talent is real, but when work turns uphill, you abandon it. I have seen you walk away from projects at the moment they began to require you as much as you required them. You must learn persistence. Adler looked up just long enough to confirm that the words had landed, then went on. Elena, the letter said, understands the demands of wealth. She built a career in finance before I met her. More importantly, she loved me for my faults as well as my strengths. She will not punish you. She will mentor you. You may choose to fight her and lose not only money but time. Or you may choose to work with her and gain what money alone has never provided you: discipline, patience, a sense of work well done. The letter did not swell into sentiment. Charles had written it as he lived, direct, unsparing fare. This is not a rebuke from beyond the grave, Adler read. It is the last structure I can give you. A legacy is a house. If not maintained, it falls. If handed to hands untrained, it burns. I entrust both house and hands to Elena until you are ready. Adler lowered the pages but didn't fold them, as if folding would crumple something irreversible. The room was so quiet I could hear the HVAC hum change pitch. Lucas found his voice first. This is outrageous, he said, the veneer cracking. We will contest it. There is a deterrent to that, Adler said, moving to the concluding page. Your father included a contest clause. Any formal legal challenge to this will result in forfeiture of the challenger's bequest, which will then pass to the Whitmore Foundation. Cowardice, Lucas said, hiding behind legal tricks. It's common and enforceable, Adler replied, unruffled. Your father also left affidavits from his physicians regarding capacity. The execution was witnessed and notarized. The document is sound. Celeste pressed her thumb hard into the seam of her water glass until her knuckle blanched. So our homes, our accounts. Do we lose everything to her signature? I spoke for the first time since the letter began because the room needed a human answer, not only a legal one. Your father left each of you your current residences outright, I said. He also provided for monthly distributions consistent with your present obligations and lifestyle. The trust oversight concerns major assets, business holdings, investments, commercial properties. Rowan's eyes flicked to mine, searching for condescension and finding none. And the conditions, he asked. Appendix B, benchmarks, Adler said. Professional contribution, financial prudence, and personal development assessed by the trustee, with input from a small panel specified by your father. That panel includes who Rowan asked. Details are in the appendix. Adler said, closing the portfolio. Today only the framework matters. Silence again. Not empty, but crowded pride and salt arithmetic. I thought of Charles practicing the shape of this day with me. His finger tapping the blanket in time with the morphine drip. His humor intact even as his body betrayed him. They will shout, he had said. You will not. He had been right as usual. Mr. Adler set the letter gently on the table as if returning a fragile organ to a chest. This concludes the primary provisions, he said. You are all welcome to review the full document with independent counsel. Lucas leaned on the back of his chair, knuckles white. A vein ticked at his temple. He looked at me when he spoke, not at Adler. You won't enjoy this, he said. We will make certain of it. I folded my hands in my lap, the way I did when waiting out a hostile question in a shareholder meeting. Your father asked me for one promise, I said. That I would do what needed doing without rancor. Celeste looked from her brother to me and back again, as if a compass needle had been demagnetized. Rowan studied the skyline, the glossy buildings flattened by glass, then closed his notebook without writing a word. In the reflection on the conference room window, I could see all of us at once, 3 children, an attorney, and a woman who refused to be erased. Outside, the afternoon light shifted a shade warmer winter, trying on the idea of spring and setting it back on the rack. Mr. Adler gathered the papers into their leather folder. Somewhere on Commonwealth Avenue, traffic rearranged itself through a timed sequence of greens. I slid my chair back, stood, and smoothed the jacket Charles had thought too sober. It fit differently now, as if the seams had adjusted themselves during the reading. Mrs. Hanley's bracelets flashed through my mind, her whisper in the last row. I thought of the rosemary still fresh in my purse, the scent Charles claimed sharpened his memory on difficult days. I thought above all of his signature, those decisive strokes committing intention to paper so that it would not fade with him. Thank you, Mr. Adler, I said. He inclined his head. We'll be in touch. I left the conference room without hurry, the soles of my shoes silent against the carpet. At the elevator, the doors parted as if on cue. The mirrored walls caught my face and gave it back to me without judgment. I stepped inside, pressed L, and watched the numbers descend 12, 11, 10 each, a small drum beat. In my bag, the sprig of rosemary released a clean green thread of scent. I breathed it in and closed my eyes for the length of one floor. The elevator chimed. The doors opened. I walked out into the afternoon. The elevator left me at street level with a click that sounded like a period. Outside, winter had pared the city down to lines and corners. I walked a block, then another, letting the cold press the noise from my head. By the time I reached my car, a single text notification waited on the dash display from an unknown number that only looked anonymous. You will hear from our counsel. I didn't answer. The rosemary in my bag breathed its green thread of scent into the quiet cabin. I set both hands on the wheel until they warmed. The petition arrived 2 days later, couriered in a manila envelope stiff with stamps. Emergency motion to remove trustee for incapacity and conflict filed by Hallowell and Pratt on behalf of Lucas Rowan and Celeste Whitmore. The language had the gloss of confidence and the aroma of haste. There were words like fragile state of bereavement and questionable qualifications and undue influence that were not evidence so much as mood music. Mr. Adler called before I had finished reading. Don't be alarmed, he said. It's the blunt instrument they reach for when they mistake momentum for merit. We'll need to appear. Judge Albright has Wednesday at 10. Do I speak? I asked. You'll answer what's asked, he said. We'll do the speaking. After we hung up, I set the petition on the dining table and smoothed the creases with my palm. The apartment was still half his, half mine, his books arranged by picos by author, my cookbooks by recipe. His preferred fountain pens aligned on the tray, my mechanical pencil tucked among them as if it had been invited. I opened a drawer and took out the narrow notebook from the hospital nights. On its last page, under a note about a maintenance lien in Chicago, I had written a line he'd said when the morphine was steady and his humor was unkind to himself. They will come at you sideways first, then straight on. Keep your shoulders square. I arrived at the courthouse early. The stone steps had been salted, but the edges still held a seam of ice. A woman in a camel coat nearly slipped and laughed at her own danger. Mr. Adler was waiting with a younger associate whose name I immediately forgot, and a woman about my age in a navy dress and low heels, her hair pinned in a no-nonsense twist. Elena, this is Dr. Miriam Sloan Adler said, board-certified psychiatrist. She consulted with Charles in his last month's capacity issues. She also evaluated you recently at Charles's request. We met in December, Dr. Sloan said, extending a dry hand. At my office on Newbury. I remembered the room, no diplomas on the wall, only framed watercolors of harbors in winter. I remembered her quiet operational questions. Did I sleep? Did I eat? When I made decisions, did I hesitate for fear of how they would look on paper later? I had on that day told the truth. In the corridor outside courtroom 6B, Lucas stood with a man whose hair looked like it had been parted with a ruler and whose tie knot could have served as a wedge. Celeste watched me as a cat watches a window intently, as if the outside might fall in. Rowan kept his eyes on his phone, scrolling and stopping as if he were reading the same 3 lines and refusing to memorize them. The clerk called us in, Judge Vera Albright. 60s precise bob expression, neutral, out of habit, took the bench. The petitioner's counsel rose. Good morning, Your Honor. Daniel Pratt for the Whitmore children. Mr. Pratt, the judge said. Mr. Adler. Adler stood. Good morning, Your Honor. Pratt launched. Your Honor. The late Mr. Whitmore's will place his extraordinary power in the hands of Ms. Ward, a woman who, through no fault of her own, is clearly in a compromised emotional state. The petitioners are concerned about precipitous decision-making at a vulnerable time. Furthermore, questions linger about Ms. Ward's qualifications to manage a complex holding company, evidence Judge Albright asked, cutting through the rhetoric with a practiced splice. Pratt gestured to a stack of exhibits. We have statements from family friends regarding Ms. Ward's distress at the funeral and following days. We have emails from Whitmore and Kent employees noting operational changes Ms. Ward has initiated already without consulting key stakeholders. We have, Adler didn't rise. He merely lifted a finger on the table between us. Your Honor, we'll stipulate that grief exists. It is not disqualifying. As to qualifications, with the court's permission, we'll submit Ms. Ward's professional history, 30 years in finance, culminating as CFO of Bracken and Wyeth, a manufacturing conglomerate with revenues significantly larger than Whitmore and Kent's. We'll also submit the independent capacity evaluations requested by Mr. Whitmore for both himself and Ms. Ward, conducted within the last 6 weeks of his life. And finally, the operating report showing that the only immediate changes Ms. Ward has implemented since the will's execution are standard vendor renegotiations and a modest consolidation of duplicative service contracts, resulting in improved margins last quarter. Numbers, Judge Albright asked, flipping through the exhibits the clerk placed before her. 4.2% above the trailing quarter, Adler said, verified by the firm's auditors. Pratt tried a different angle. Your Honor, the will's conditions amount to an unusual level of control in a non-biological spouse. Not unusual, Judge Albright said, paging not, looking up. Uncommon, perhaps. Not legally suspect. Is there evidence of incapacity or misconduct by the trustee? Pratt faltered for the space of a breath. Your Honor, we submit that the undue influence question remains live. Then you file the appropriate challenge, the judge said, and assume the risks associated with the no contest clause Mr. Whitmore included with Attorney Adler's counsel, which I see here. She tapped a page. We are not trying the will today. We are considering removal for cause. So far, I see assertion where I require evidence. He pivoted again, a dancer out of breath. Ms. Ward has already contacted vendors, restructured consulting relationships, and altered internal reporting lines without. Adler stood this time, which is to say, she is performing the role assigned to her by the decedent. If petitioners wish to argue that business should halt in mourning, that is a theological question, not a legal one. Meanwhile, Dr. Sloan is present to address questions regarding Ms. Ward's capacity and stability. Judge Albright glanced toward Dr. Sloan. Dr. Sloan rose. Her voice did not try to persuade, it simply informed. I evaluated Ms. Ward on December 9th and again January 5th using standard instruments for mood and cognitive function. She exhibits grief consistent with recent bereavement without evidence of major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, or cognitive impairment. She demonstrates intact executive function and judgment. In my professional opinion, she is capable of making complex decisions. And Mr. Whitmore, the judge asked. I evaluated him twice in November, Dr. Sloan said. He was of sound mind at the time he discussed his estate structure. He anticipated conflict. He was to use his phrase, building guardrails. Judge Albright returned to the petitioner's table. Mr. Pratt, unless there is more than friend's impressions and an objection to ordinary business operations, I am inclined to deny. Your Honor, Pratt said. Reaching for indignation and coming up with cloth, the petitioners have only just begun to gather. Then gather, the judge said. But do not ask this court to remove a trustee on innuendo. Motion denied. The gavel came down without flourish. The sound was not loud, only final. In the corridor, the air felt thinner, as if someone had opened a window at the end of a long room. Lucas brushed past me with his jaw set so hard I could almost hear enamel. Celeste stared at the linoleum and blinked quickly, breaking mascara into small constellations. Rowan didn't follow them. He waited near the elevator bank until the crowd thinned. You were prepared for everything, he said, not admiring, merely stating. No, I said, just for this. He nodded once, looked as if he might leave, then didn't. Do you have a minute? Mr. Adler's eyebrows lifted in a question. I gave him a small nod. I'll call you this afternoon, he said, taking Dr. Sloan down the hall. Rowan led me out to the curb, where a black sedan idled with the kind of invisibility money buys. He opened the rear door and we sat the car separating us from the temperature of the day. I've been reading, he said. Not the letter, well, not only the letter, the filings, the structure, the holdings. I was angry enough that I wanted to find a seam that would come apart in my hands. There isn't one. Your father was thorough, I said. He tilted his head. What I don't understand is why you would want this job. Why not take your 70% and let the company fend for itself? Because he asked me, I nearly said. Because a promise is a kind of contract that outlives the paper. Instead, I kept to what could be shared. Whitmore and Kent is not a thing that runs by gravity, I said. If it runs unattended, the elevator doesn't stay on the right floor. It shoots into the basement or the sky. I know, he said. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with his thumb. I also know I've been the one jamming the buttons for years. We were quiet long enough to hear the ticking of the car's cooling engine through the firewall. What do you want from us? He asked. Not to make it harder, I said. And later, when you're ready for us to speak like adults who can admit what we know and what we don't. He looked at me as if recalibrating a lens. If I asked to see the current numbers, would you show me? Not the shareholder slide deck. The real 3-ring binder, the one with all the flags. Yes, I said. At the office, tomorrow morning, 9. He nodded and knocked twice on the glass partition, and the driver took it as a signal. The door locks chirped, and I stepped back out into the cold. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. The next morning at 9, Rowan arrived at Whitmore and Kent in a charcoal suit that fit like a decision. The receptionist looked uncertain for a moment, old habits then recovered. Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. In Charles's office still. Charles's office, its order preserved its pens, aligned its photograph of the Cape, turned toward the light I had laid out. The binder he'd asked for tabs like small flags marking territory. This is everything I said. Profiles of each portfolio, leases by expiration date, vendor agreements currently under review, debt maturities pending, litigation insurance exposure, and the schedule of capital projects. The executive summaries are mine, not the communication department's. He opened the binder and began to read not like a tourist, but like a surveyor. After 10 minutes, he stopped at a comparative analysis page and frowned. You renegotiated cleaning contracts across 4 properties at once. Staggered, I said, but with coordinated terms. It's not glamorous, but it isn't supposed to be. He turned the page. Chicago outperformed expectations in Q4. We tightened construction allowances, I said, and we stopped paying for delays caused by tenants' own design changes. He laughed once, a short, surprised sound that acknowledged cleverness without conceding anything larger. That will make you unpopular. With vendors who like a slow drip, I said. We'll survive their disappointment. He read for another 20 minutes, then closed the binder and set both hands on the cover as if steadying it. I'd like to help, he said. Not to circumvent you, to be useful. Useful is a start, I said, but there's a condition attached to useful. You know which one your father wrote under your name. His jaw worked not in defiance exactly, more as if testing a molar with his tongue. You think I have a problem with risk. I think you call it edge when it's appetite, I said. Your father thought so too. He nodded once, and the nod had the quality of a pledge extracted by himself from himself. I'll make an appointment, he said. Give me a name. Dr. Sloan, I said, this afternoon at 4. You already called, he said, and it wasn't a question. I assumed you would say yes, I said. Not because you owe me, because you're tired of your own pattern. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. A noise in the outer office, a breathless rustle made us turn as Celeste came through the door without knocking, cheeks flushed under careful makeup posture, pitched forward by urgency. She stopped when she saw Rowan seated across from me, then turned her anger toward him as if toward a familiar wall. "You're meeting with her," she said. "After everything." Rowan stood not in challenge but in a show of ordinary courtesy. "After everything," he said. "She's taking the company," Celeste said to me, her voice tight enough to cut. "She's taking Father. Now she wants us to audition for whatever crumbs she decides to drop." "Stop," Rowan said quietly. He didn't raise his voice, which made it more effective. "You're repeating Lucas's lines." "They're true," she said, but her certainty wasn't whole. "Have you read the will?" Rowan asked. "Not Lucas's summary. The document, the letter, the appendix." "I don't need to read a letter to know what's fair," she said, though she looked at the binder as if it contained a sheet of paper that might absolve her of reading it. I pushed a portfolio across the desk, a twin to the one I'd prepared for Rowan, but different in its contents. Pale blue tab dividers marked sections with names like Design Strategy and Project Pipeline and Mentorship. "This is yours," I said. "Not a test. An offer. Your father wanted you to finish what you started and then set you to work making the buildings less like bank statements and more like places people want to be. He asked me to make sure you had the scaffolding to do it." She didn't touch it. Her eyes went to her brother instead, as if his expression could translate the object into a language she trusted. "It's not a trick," Rowan said. "She gave me mine. The pages with the worst things are written plainly. The pages with opportunities are real." Celeste reached out as if touching something hot and skimmed the top tab with a fingertip. The first sheet was a structured plan, tuition assistance to complete the last semester she'd abandoned when a professor's critique landed like a slap. A design residency with Whitmore and Kent's in-house team, and 3 properties identified as candidates for lobby and common area redesigns under her lead with a senior architect as ballast. "Why would he do this for me?" she asked, and the question was both genuine and accusatory. "Because he saw what you were when you didn't flee," I said. "Because he wanted you to finish even when the runway got rough." She pressed her lips together, then looked at me for the first time without trying to harden her gaze into a weapon. "And if I don't want his strings," she said. "Then you keep your home," I said. "You receive monthly distributions. The rest sits until someone else is ready to steward it. Nobody drags you." She nodded once, tiny a needle's width of concession. She took the portfolio under her arm as if it might bite if held in a hand and left without saying goodbye. Rowan watched the door close and exhaled through his nose. "She'll read it," he said. "I hope so," I said, and it was not a strategy, it was a human wish. When he had gone, I stood in Charles's office and felt the imprint of him in objects that had no business holding memory, the glass paperweight with a map of the city frozen inside the brass letter opener shaped like a fountain pen, the chair that leaned back one notch farther than I liked. On the credenza, his humidor capable of holding a ritual he'd long since abandoned sat closed. I ran a finger over the inlay of his initials and let my hand fall. By late afternoon, the petition to remove felt as though it had happened a week ago, not a handful of hours. I sat with Adler in a small conference room whose view offered only the brickbat of another building and its ladder of windows. "It won't be their last attempt," he said. "I know," I said. He passed me a folder anyway. "Paper for paper," he said. "You prefer ink to reassurance." Inside were crisp copies, the judge's order denying removal, affidavits from Dr. Sloan and the 2 physicians who had signed letters for Charles, the quarterly report summaries with the margin improvements highlighted not in yellow but in the cool blue Adler favored. I slid the folder into my bag. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, evening had slunk in early the way it does in winter, devouring edges. A bus sighed to a stop and opened its doors, warm air pushing at my coat. Across the street, a florist was closing. Buckets of stock and ranunculus were being carried inside against the cold. I stood still long enough to feel the ache behind my eyes ease and not spill over. Then I turned my face into the wind and walked toward the corner. In my bag, the rosemary kept its promise. By dusk, the courthouse day had thinned to a film of exhaustion. Morning brought motion. At 9, Adler's number lit my phone. "Regulatory notice," he said without preamble. "Administrative inquiry opened by the Division of Fiduciary Oversight. Allegations mismanagement, self-dealing, failure to account. Filed by," I asked, though I didn't need the name. Hallowell and Pratt forwarded a citizen complaint. It's artfully drafted enough smoke to interest a bureaucrat, not enough fire to warm a courtroom. We'll respond within the week. In the meantime, anticipate a temporary hold on major discretionary moves. I thanked him, set the phone down, and watched the city rinse itself in pale winter light. The inquiry wasn't a surprise. It was a lever. The point wasn't winning. The point was slowing. At 10:17, a second blow landed. Commonwealth Business Journal posted a feature built from half-truths and cutaways. "Boardroom outsider seizes Whitmore legacy." It described me as a former CFO whose brief marriage had accelerated her ascent and quoted sources close to the family about a power consolidation unprecedented in Boston estates. The article said nothing about capacity evaluations or a no-contest clause. It misnamed 2 properties and still managed to sound authoritative. My phone rang before I finished the second paragraph. Elena Celeste. The line held the sound of movement, a door shutting somewhere, a breath taken too fast. Have you seen it? I have. There are more coming, she said. Lucas hired Mara Voss. She has a schedule for stories, 5 outlets, each one uglier. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'm not calling as a courtesy, she said softer. I'm calling because I read Father's letter last night, all of it. I don't know what to think, but this... She stopped as if the sentence couldn't carry its own weight. I thought you should know. After we hung up, I walked the length of the apartment and back each step, sanding a rough place inside me. Then I opened the file on my desk, labeled Transparency Trust Statements, Vendor Lists, the Audit Letter, a 1-page summary written in plain English for people who don't speak footnote. Numbers are a language. Part of the work is translation. Adler and I sat together that afternoon in a room that had no view and therefore no distractions. We drafted a response letter to the division attachments, indexed receipts, clipped the tone neither defensive nor proud. He would handle the press line, brief, factual, impersonal. After he left, the quiet moved in again, not hostile, just present. I took a card from a drawer and dialed the number on it. Thomas Keene, a voice said. Dry-clipped a man who had learned to count to 10 before he spoke. Mr. Keene, it's Elena Ward. Charles mentioned you. Silence tightened, then loosened. Mrs. Ward. I wondered if this call would come. He asked me to be available for contingencies. He described this one as likely. We met the next morning in Charles's study. Keene was tall, near retirement, the kind of fit that comes from a habit rather than a resolution. He placed a thin leather folder on the table and didn't push it toward me as if to say, the decision remained mine. Mr. Whitmore retained me when the Rivera venture began to smell wrong, he said. He wanted clarity, not leverage. I followed money where it wanted not to be followed. Inside the folder bank, records correspondence, a partnership agreement with handwritten marginalia that was not Lucas's hand, and a series of transfers routed through an account that hid behind a grammar of abbreviations. There were also invoices from a boutique crisis firm paid from a company Lucas had publicly described as paused. Is it solid, I asked? Triply Keene said. Enough to interest regulators, enough to interest a prosecutor if anyone were inclined. He asked that I deliver it to you and no one else. His instructions, 3 steps, Keene said. Private conversation first, family disclosure second if necessary, authorities last. He called it a ladder. I closed the folder without looking again. The contents didn't change with rereading. Where is Lucas this morning, I asked. Racquetball at 9, Keene said. Coffee in the club lounge at 9:30. He orders black. He doesn't add sugar even when he wants to. The lounge was quiet when I arrived, all leather and hush. Lucas came in wind-fleshed and immaculate, the kind of man who looks newly tailored after exercise. He saw me and let the irritation show, then made it a smile. You've been busy, he said. The journal was kind to you given the circumstances. I didn't ask for kindness, I said. I placed the folder on the table between us and rested my fingertips lightly on the edge. This is for you. He didn't touch it. What is this supposed to be? Clarity, I said. Rivera, West Haven, the Cayman vehicle that isn't disclosed in your partnership letters. The payments to Voss's firm run through a consulting company you called Paused, and a pattern of transfers that suggest you've used investor money to plug gaps in other ventures. His face did not redden, it drained. Then color returned in patches like a map. You'd take this public, he said. I would rather not, I said. Your father wanted you to have a door that could still open from your side. End the media campaign. Withdraw the complaint. Meet the conditions he set, or I will show this first to your siblings. Then, if needed, to the people whose job it is to read bank statements for a living. He stared at me, and behind his anger I saw the thing that had driven him all along, an appetite for velocity without friction. So you blackmail with a moral vocabulary, he said. Elegant. I offer choices, I said. None of them are easy. He looked at the folder, then at me. I want 24 hours, he said. You may have until 5 tomorrow, I said, sliding the folder to his side of the table. If you don't come, I convene a meeting at the house with your brother and sister, and I bring this. He put a hand on the folder, then palm flat as if feeling for a pulse. He really planned for everything he said, half to himself. He planned for you, I said. At 4:57 the next day, the study held the 4 of us, the way it had held Charles's temperance and zeal. Rowan arrived first, precise as always. The binder he'd borrowed returned with new flags of his own. Celeste came close behind with the pale blue portfolio under her arm, her expression fighting a battle with itself. At 5, the door opened again. Lucas was early by a minute, which was his way of owning a room. Thank you for coming, I said. He raised a hand slightly. I'll go first, he said, and for a flicker he sounded like the eldest sibling accepting a burden without performing it. I've withdrawn the complaint with the division. I terminated Voss's engagement. There will be no more placements. Celeste's head snapped toward him. Yesterday you said— I said a lot of things yesterday, he said. Some of them survive sunlight, some don't. He looked at me then, and for the first time since the funeral, there was no active hostility in it. Only calculation tempered by something like fatigue. I assume you have copies of what you showed me, he said. I do, I said. And I assume the next step, if I reverse myself, would be a disclosure to them. He tipped his head toward his siblings. That was your father's ladder, I said. Then I accept the terms in Appendix B, he said. All of them. Rowan let out a breath he had been holding so long it had borrowed a room inside him. Celeste stared at her brother as if he had spoken a different language and she had understood every word. Are you admitting, Rowan began? I'm admitting I need the structure Father designed, Lucas said, and the word father landed without irony. We can leave the nouns for the people who deal in nouns. We sat. Keen's folder stayed closed on the credenza, a witness not called. Rowan reached for the binder he'd been reading and slid it across the table until it touched Lucas's knuckles. There's a tab on compliance you'll want, he said. I added some notes. Lucas glanced at the tab, then back at Rowan. A dozen fights and reconciliations passed in that look, most of them unspoken. Celeste stood as if standing might help her pick sides. She opened her portfolio and stared at the first page where the steps she had been avoiding waited with their small black squares tidy and unthreatening. I met with the in-house team, she said, surprising herself perhaps as much as us. They walked me through 3 lobbies. I had opinions. You always do, Rowan said, and this time it sounded like an affection. Her mouth twitched halfway between a smirk and something gentler. She looked at me, and the look did not ask for permission or dare refusal. It simply placed a weight where it belonged. I haven't decided, she said. But I am reading. Reading is motion, I said. We were quiet then in a way that felt less like a standoff and more like a room learning a new sound. Adler arrived with a sheaf of clean copies, orders letters, the regulator's acknowledgement of withdrawal paper that turned the day into record. He nodded when he saw Lucas. Good, he said. It was the only editorial we needed. He reviewed the document, slid the necessary pages across the table, and left with the same economy with which he had entered. Business could be efficient without being cruel. Charles had taught me that, and so had the city itself. After the door closed, Lucas remained seated. He didn't bolt for a phone or a car. He looked at the photograph of the cape on the credenza, and then at the pens in their silver tray aligned to a degree he would have mocked when he was 22. He cleared his throat. There's something else, he said, the words cautious as if they might crack. Mother called me. She asked for documents, trust provisions, your appointment, whatever she thought she could pry loose. I told her no. Rowan's eyes flicked up. Celeste's mouth tightened, not in anger at him, but at a history she knew by heart. What did she say? Rowan asked. That I was becoming like him, Lucas said, and the sentence landed and stayed. No one spoke. There are moments when silence doesn't avoid a subject, it honors it. The house settled around us in its familiar old bones. Outside, the late light caught the edge of the river and turned it into a blade. I looked at the 3 of them, one with his shoulders squared to await he had finally named, one tracing a new map he hadn't trusted himself to draw, one holding a portfolio that frightened her less by the hour. Thank you for coming, I said again, but this time the words carried all their freight. Rowan rose first. He put his hand flat on the binder as if to claim it without conquering it. I'll be in early tomorrow, he said to no one and everyone. Celeste closed her portfolio and tucked it beneath her arm. I have to return a call, she said, which was both literal and a small act of courage. Lucas remained a moment longer studying the grain in the table as if it contained a message. Then he stood, rolled his shoulders once, and looked at me without ornament. I'll show up, he said. I expect you will, I said. They left in 3 different directions, and the house held the shape of their absence, the way a hand remembers a ring long after it's removed. I sat alone in the study where Charles had kept his ledgers and his patience. Keen's folder remained closed. The rosemary in my bag pressed its clean brightness through the leather. I opened the window an inch against the cold and let the air move the curtains just enough to prove it was there. The night I cracked the window, the house exhaled. Cold slid across the sill and found the curtains. Paper on the desk lifted and settled. By morning, the study smelled faintly of rosemary and old cedar. 3 months blurred into a ledger of small changes. Rowan showed up early enough to unsettle the security guard's routine, then stayed late with spreadsheets open like night maps. The gambling rooms he once fed with adrenaline were replaced by a chair in Dr. Sloane's office and a plastic cup of church basement coffee. He spoke a new Grammar Hedge stress test scenario without the reckless lilt it used to carry. Celeste read the blue portfolio until the corners softened. She took a hard hat she'd once mocked and walked job sites with a notebook clutched to her chest, pointing at lighting runs, at drywall seams, at a lobby where the circulation felt wrong. When the first set of renderings came back from the in-house team, she taped them to the conference wall and stood back as if she'd hung photographs of a family she wanted to claim. Lucas arrived in a suit without an audience. Compliance became his discipline and his penance. He sat with counsel and drafted a code he had once sneered at, then walked it floor to floor. He didn't soften language, he signed his name at the bottom. The division's inquiry creaked on and then de-iced itself. Adler's submission of audits and schedules did what numbers at their best do, remove temperature. The hold eased, routine approvals returned to routine. It was a Wednesday when Adler called about Vivian. Motion filed, he said the word stripped of drama by use. She's claiming continuing support under the divorce agreement. There's no clause for that. Delay and noise, I said. Exactly, he said. We can meet it in our sleep, but I'd rather we didn't sleep. Transparency meeting. The four of us sat in the conference room with copies of the filing before us. Celeste read hers twice, then traced the margin with a fingernail. Rowan scanned for the single sentence that mattered and found it and asked without a right. She'll drag it, Lucas said. She's counting on impatience, Adler said. She doesn't get a settlement. Your father made that clear. They didn't ask me to keep it quiet for appearances. They didn't ask for compromise. They nodded three heads at different angles of acceptance and the case moved forward. Weeks later, the judge dismissed the claim with the kind of language that slams doors gently. No cameras, no quotes. A docket entry and a sigh. On the morning of the anniversary, I went to the chapel early with white roses because Charles had called them honest flowers. The air held that winter hum particular to old churches' pipes crossing in the walls, the soft shiver of someone else's footsteps. I smoothed the program stack with my palm and placed one stem at the small altar. The Whitmore crest on the prayer cards felt less like a brand and more like script letters on a family recipe. They came together, Lucas first, then Rowan and Celeste. He carried a small rosewood box. I recognized at once Charles's humidor repurposed in the way objects sometimes accept. We found this in his study closet, Lucas said. It was marked for today. Inside were 3 envelopes addressed in Charles's hand and a 4th with my name. We didn't separate. We didn't make a circle. We just found our pews and opened our letters. Charles's voice returned exactly as he had left it, plain exact, neither ornamented nor apologetic. He wrote to me about the burden he had placed and the confidence that had made the placing possible. He wrote to them about the kind of work that feels like a finish line and the kind that feels like a beginning. He wrote a line that ended with nothing sentimental and meant more because of it. Thank you for doing the difficult thing. When paper stopped rustling, we stood without scrambling the quiet. Celeste's mascara had smudged cleanly a new constellation under each eye. Rowan folded his letter into thirds with the neatness of a man who had once mislaid things and decided not to again. Lucas tucked his into the inside pocket of his jacket and patted it the way some men pat a passport. Back at the office that afternoon, Adler set a folder on the table and slid it toward me, with the practiced movement of a man who has given and received thousands of decisions. Benchmarks met, he said. Signed certifications. The panel has no reservations. The folder held what 3 months can become when the days are the right kind. Attendance logs, evaluation forms, the in-house architect's comments on Celeste's lobby work evidence of listening, the counselor's note on Rowan's 9 clean months, the compliance audit with Lucas's name at the top and none of his shortcuts inside it. I initialed where the flags marked and closed the folder. We proceed, I said. We convened in the study, no ceremony, only the necessary people, and the table that had held so many maps of other people's futures. Adler brought the instruments. He read the necessary phrases. I signed and passed and signed again. They signed. There is a sound paper makes when a signature releases it from the one hand and places it in another. It isn't loud, but it is unmistakable. When the last sheet lay where it belonged, the room did not change, and everything did. Lucas looked at the pens lined in their tray, then lifted one and set it down where Charles would have placed it. Celeste slid her palm across the table in a small arc, the way a designer tests a finish. Rowan checked that the binder tabs faced the same direction, habit asserting itself in service of order. What do we call you now? Celeste asked, with a half-smile that wasn't armor. Elena, I said. She nodded. Then stay, she said, if you want to. Rowan glanced up. There's a pipeline review Thursdays at 8. Lucas met my eyes and didn't look away. Advisor, he said, as if trying on a word that didn't pinch. I'll be here, I said. Late that afternoon, the light went the color of old brass. We walked to the cemetery without telling each other to do it, and the stones rose from the grass like facts. The ground was soft from a thaw. We stood. We didn't arrange ourselves into a tableau. I placed a small piece of rosemary on the granite and stepped back. Rowan went first. He didn't speak to the stone. He spoke in the air close to it the way some people talk to a sleeping child. Celeste rested her fingertips on the edge and left them there long enough to feel the cold, then drew them back and found my arm for balance. Lucas came last. He stood a pace behind me for a beat, then closer, then beside. "You belong here," he said. The wind moved through the bare trees and made a sound like a page turning. We stood until the cold insisted. On the walk back, no one hurried. The house waited with its familiar stubborn warmth. Inside the study, the window was still open the inch I'd left it. I closed it with the heel of my hand and felt the latch catch. The room held still, not tense, not paused, just held. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.